Shut up and sit down.
Hey all you Mega Visionaries, Sega nerds and Dreamcast junkies. Today we are going to be looking at this. The StrikerDC gamepad by RetroFighters. If you don't know about it, it is a new controller for the Sega Dreamcast. It started as a Kickstarter project back in February 2019, successfully funded in March 2019, and production finally finished in May of 2020. And the first pre-orders came out June 2020, and we've had some new orders come out, and we've finally got our hands on one. So we're going to have a look at it. We're going to crack it open, check it out, give it a review, and to do that, we need to test it out on some games. Okay, so now it's time to actually take a look at the controller and crack this box open. So, the lid is on a little bit tight, but there's actually nothing wrong with that. It's good to see them. Yeah, actually one thing I will say, it's really nice feel to the box. There's a bit of a tactile feeling, especially around the controller and the StrikerDC logo. The rest of the box is really smooth, but feels really good quality. So what we've got in here, a bit of protective tissue paper, lovely stuff. Some funky RetroFighters stickers. An FAQ about the controller itself. And a quick start instruction manual. Not sure why you'd need one of those for a controller. I mean, it mostly looks like stuff like social media and customer service for RetroFighters, so it's pretty cool. And a really funky retro keychain. Lovely. And then for the main event itself, the controller. Let's move that out. Okay. Let's get a feel for it. So yeah, first impressions, it feels really comfortable. It feels very solid, very good quality. One instant difference I can tell is the shoulder buttons and trigger buttons. So the original Dreamcast controller only had trigger buttons, whereas this has got the shoulder buttons too, a bit more like modern controllers. There is also a turbo button and a clear button on the front. The analog stick itself feels pretty comfortable. It's indented, unlike the original Dreamcast controller, so I'm not sure you can see that. It feels better on the thumb. Basically, you've got a groove there for your thumb to actually go into. The D-pad instantly feels a lot nicer. It's less sharp than the original Dreamcast controller, which was known to cause some very sore thumbs back in the day, especially on fighting games. The start button feels a little bit smaller. In fact, I can see it's quite shallow there on it. Not a big deal, just a difference. The front buttons are a bit closer together, I can feel, but feel pretty good, yeah. And of course, there is the VMU and rumble pack slot on the back. So one other difference is the cord is pointing out frontways, whereas the original Dreamcast controller used to point downways, which was always a really weird choice, I thought, from Sega. But there we go. But we can actually look at it side by side. I have my original controller here. So as you can see, a bit of a difference in sizes. So the original Dreamcast controller is a bit bigger. Width-wise, the RetroFighters one is a little bit wider. I think that's due to the fact they've actually made it more of an angle. It sticks out a bit more. Kind of more like a PlayStation or even an Xbox controller these days. The modern controllers, they do stick out a bit more, which is a bit more comfortable in the hands. Dreamcast is a bit more sharp design to it. And as you can see, that's what I was saying, the Dreamcast controller's cable sticks out the bottom, whereas RetroFighters is at the bottom, but sticks forward. As I say, it's got the slots for the VMU and rumble pack, so let's check those out. Ooh, it's always a satisfying sound, I like that. Yeah, they actually fit in very nicely. It's nice. I can feel an instant weight difference, actually, as soon as I put it in. It's actually the same as the original controller. You feel, as soon as you put the rumble pack in, you feel a bit more weight to it, which feels good though, feels nice. One obvious thing there is that on the original controller, the rounded top and the Dreamcast logo actually protected the buttons on the VMU. Well, that actually makes a difference, but yeah, that was more hidden, so this seems to be sticking out, jutting out a bit more, which does give a bit more size to the controller as soon as you put those in. Yeah, that feels pretty decent. The real test is to see how it plays. So let's test out some games. Okay, so it's time to test out some games with the StrikerDC pad. And let's face it, it'd be criminal not to check out Sonic Adventure, the Dreamcast flagship launch title. So, let's give it a go. Okay, so playing Sonic Adventure felt really good, really solid. At the very start, I will admit, the analog stick felt a little bit loose, but as I started playing, started running forward, running along, really good, really smooth, surprisingly accurate. Actually found it very easy to control Sonic, especially on some of the tighter corners and stuff. The face buttons, brilliant, yeah, worked really well. Just jumping and stuff. I mean, there's only a few buttons really in Sonic Adventure anyway. Yeah, even the snowboarding bit I found really good. And now I played the snowboarding bit not that long ago using the original Dreamcast controller, and this felt a lot better. I found the original Dreamcast controller quite twitchy on those bits and, you know, to crash a lot. But with this, it felt really good. It felt really smooth. I mean, I crashed a few times, but a lot better than normal. So very impressed actually for Sonic Adventure, and I think 3D platform games in general. Okay, next up, time to test out a fan favourite, Jet Set Radio. Bit of a unique game, as you should hopefully all know. So let's see how it works with the StrikerDC pad. Okay, playing Jet Set Radio, felt really good, felt really natural, probably more natural than the original Dreamcast controller, weirdly. The face buttons worked really well, trigger buttons were working good, but the best thing about it was the analog stick again. So moving around, doing grinds, felt really good, really responsive, very accurate as well. But the best thing about it was the graffiti. So if you've played Jet Set Radio before, you'll know that to actually do graffiti, you have to move the analog stick around in different motions. And this felt really good, felt really easy to do it, more so than the original Dreamcast controller. And that's a real testament, because that can sometimes be the hardest bit about the game and very frustrating when you screw up a big tag. So it felt really good with this one. Brilliant. Okay, time to check out another genre, racing. And I'm going to start with Speed Devils. It's very silly, very fun, but actually a very solid racer. Okay, so Speed Devils and racing games. Now, I chose Speed Devils for a reason. That's because it is the second game I got with my Dreamcast after Sonic Adventure, and it's also one of my personal favourite racers for the console. And because of that reason, I've actually played it a ton of times over the years, so I thought that was the best example for me to use with the controller. And I have to say, really good. So, like I said with the other games, the analog stick is key. It's very precise, very good. If you don't know about Speed Devils, it's a game that doesn't take itself too seriously. For example, there's loads of obstacles, moving things on the tracks that get in your way, and you have to be quite quick and quite precise to get around them sometimes, and it was really good for that. There is, however, one small problem, and I brought it up when I was doing the unboxing. The trigger buttons are a little bit smaller than the original Dreamcast ones, and also slightly closer to the body. Now, I found myself trying to do what I did with the original Dreamcast controller and wrap my fingers around the trigger buttons, and I found myself scraping against the body of the controller. And I'll give you an example. So this is the original Dreamcast controller. As you can see, the trigger buttons are a bit further away from the main body, and the way it's designed is you can wrap your fingers around quite comfortably and use the trigger buttons in such a way like that, and you don't really scrape against the actual main body itself. That's not possible with the StrikerDC controller, unfortunately, because of the way it's designed. Now, it could be just me trying to get used to the controller. You can't really do that. You kind of have to use the tips of your fingers instead. So this won't be a problem for everyone, but for me personally, I did find it a bit of an annoyance, because spending 5 or 10 minutes on a race, I did find myself scraping against the side of the controller, and it kind of just got a bit annoying trying to do that. So one slight small problem there. Otherwise, still really good. So as I say, the controls are actually quite precise in general. The actual triggers themselves also were very good for accelerating and braking. Just that slight annoyance there, and that's really the first problem I've actually found with the controller so far. Next up with the StrikerDC pad, it's time to make some crazy money. So, Crazy Taxi, another great driving game, not a racing game, but a driving game. Similar situation as with Speed Devils. I found the trigger buttons a little bit irritating again, partly because I was rubbing my fingers against the main body, and they do feel a little bit small. The analog stick felt really good, really precise again, so that was really good. One weird complaint though is trying to pull off some of the maneuvers in Crazy Taxi. So if you don't know, in Crazy Taxi you do things like drifting, or you have speed boosts as well. And to pull off a speed boost, you can do a basic speed boost by tapping B and pressing the accelerator at the same time. But you can do a really good powerful speed boost by pressing A, which slides it into reverse, then pressing B, which puts it into drive again, and the accelerator button again. So you sort of tap A, B and R, and that gives you a really powerful speed boost. Normally with a normal Dreamcast controller, I can do that 9 times out of 10. With this, I was really struggling to do it. Maybe 2 or 3 times out of 10 I was able to do that boost. Again, with the drifting, normally I'm pretty decent at drifting, but I could barely pull it off. Not sure why. It was a really weird thing. Everything else about the controller seems really precise. In the other games I've tried it out on, worked really well, but for some reason in Crazy Taxi I was unable to do the maneuvers I wanted to. So that's a bit frustrating, and it made the game a bit more irritating at the time. You can still have fun with the game, obviously, but maybe it's something I need to get used to. I'm not sure if there's a slight delay when putting the R trigger on with this controller. Who knows, but yeah, bit of a curious one there. Okay, so next up for the DC Striker Pad, I am going to be testing out the classic Soul Calibur. So onto fighting games, and Soul Calibur, probably one of the best fighting games out there, one of the best on the Dreamcast for certain. And with the StrikerDC gamepad, really good. The analog stick felt really good, really easy to use. In particular, though, the D-pad. So with fighting games, D-pad tends to be the preferred choice. It felt really nice, really smooth. The great thing is I also got to test out the new bumper buttons, a new addition to the controller. So rather than using the trigger buttons, the L and R bumper buttons actually mirror what the L and R trigger buttons do. So for fighting games, it's a little bit easier to use those. And it felt really good, it felt really natural. The face buttons felt really good, really easy to use. I basically won every fight I was in. So yeah, it felt really good, really nice. Absolutely no complaints there with that one. Okay, so for the next game I'm going to test out, it's another fighter. This time it's a 2D fighter. It's Capcom versus SNK. Capcom versus SNK. Yeah, felt really good. In particular, the D-pad again. So especially with 2D fighting games, D-pad is more essential. It's a lot more precise and usually easier to put off the movers. With the original Dreamcast controller, as mentioned before, the D-pad was quite sharp, quite painful to use, especially after a lot of putting off special moves and stuff. So with the RetroFighters controller, it's actually a lot smoother, a lot nicer to press. The bumper buttons again, more natural to use. Face buttons are really good. Also tested out the analog stick a bit. Not as good as using the D-pad for 2D fighters still. Felt really good though. I was able to put off a few moves quite well, but the D-pad was where it was at. And yeah, it felt really good, really easy. Again, basically won all my matches, so really happy with that. But yeah, felt good, really responsive, fast, excellent. Next up for testing this out is Quake III. So on to first-person shooters and Quake III. I mean, the Dreamcast isn't very well known for its first-person shooters, but Quake 3 is probably the best loved and one of the best known games out there. So, first thing said, I hadn't actually played a Dreamcast shooter for a long time. So it took a bit of getting used to using the analog stick on the left to look around and the buttons on the right to move. Modern controllers, modern first-person shooters, it's the other way around. It's flipped and also you're using dual analog. So it felt a little bit alien to me at first. That said, I did get used to it. So managed to do a lot of killing, fragged a lot of guys. Yeah, basically won my matches. I did do it all offline, so it was against bots. But the Dreamcast is still online with Quake 3 and some other games. So thank you to the community out there that has kept it online. You guys are ace. But yeah, I did it offline. But I won, and it felt really good. So, as I say, it took a little bit getting used to, but partly because of the way the controls are flipped around. Responsive, the triggers were actually quite responsive. I also used the shoulder buttons a little bit to shoot as well. I think that's down to a preference. I was happy with the actual trigger buttons for this game. Moving around felt really easy, really natural. The analog stick, again, was very precise, so I actually found it very easy to manoeuvre. It's less twitchy than the original Dreamcast controller. So, really good. Really happy with that. Yeah, the next game for me to try out is Ecco the Dolphin. So, Ecco the Dolphin. Some people love it, some people hate it. Personally, I love it. And one of the reasons I chose to test out the StrikerDC controller with it is because it's a very unique game. So, in Ecco the Dolphin, there are different types of gameplay elements to it. Yes, you are always swimming underwater, but there are moments where it's very peaceful, very tranquil, you take your time. There are other moments where it becomes very frenetic, very frantic, such as getting chased by underwater sea monsters, or sometimes just trying to solve puzzles. So, it felt like a perfect opportunity to test the controller out with that. And, just like a lot of the other games, the analog stick became very essential, and once again, it proved its worth. So the moments where you have to be precise and accurate, it felt really good, really easy to manoeuvre around, set yourself up for targets, for example, and attack. It also gave me the opportunity to really test out the turbo button. So if you don't know, to activate the turbo button, you hold down the turbo button and then press whichever button you want to make turbo. So for Ecco the Dolphin, you often have to swim by tapping A lot. But with this, with the turbo, I could just basically hold it down once and the turbo would kick in and I swim along. To cancel the turbo, you just press the clear button and it sets everything back to how it was. So it's a really good way to test out that feature as well. And generally, it just felt really good. It felt really easy to control, like a lot of the other games. All the face buttons worked really well with it. Trigger buttons and the bumper buttons, again, felt nice and easy to use. But again, the key thing was the analog stick, and it worked really well, I think. So, Ecco the Dolphin is a pass as well. So the StrikerDC controller has worked pretty well on every other game I've tried, but there is one last final test, the ultimate one for the controller. Let's see if it can handle Sonic Shuffle. No, didn't make any better. Sorry guys. Can't expect miracles though. So, final thoughts. StrikerDC controller by RetroFighters. Really impressed, really good. As I say, the analog stick in particular, really like that for driving games, and Jet Set Radio is perfect on. Very precise, very easy to use. The trigger buttons, that's the one thing I had a little minor gripe with in the driving games, because my finger did keep scratching the side, but that's didn't hinder the gameplay at all. The actual feel of the triggers is really good. So it's probably something I need to get used to, just position my fingers slightly differently. Yeah, and the D-pad is a lot nicer than the original controller. If you're interested, it will set you back about $49.99 American dollars. It is shipped from America. In pounds, that's about £38. If you are shipping abroad like I had to, you do have to be careful of shipping costs. So it does cost another like $25 or so to actually ship to the UK at least. Different prices for different countries. I think to Canada is about $10 or so. So just something to bear in mind. So for Americans especially, $49, not the end of the world for a new controller. When you're shipping abroad with the extra cost on top, you might have to think about it. I think it's really good though, really worth it, especially into fighting games and stuff, or if you just need a new Dreamcast controller, this could be the one to go for, especially with the extra long cord. Yeah, it's really good. Definitely recommend it, so yeah, check it out.